Hey, there's another brutal blizzard in America's heartland. It looks like global warming just will not go away. This is one of that's packing hurricane-force winds and up to an alarming 15 inches of snow.
Unbelievable. The storm has gone as far south as Texas, and it's knocked out power in that state, along with Oklahoma and Kansas. Charlene Israel has the story.
It's the second blizzard to slam the country's midsection in less than a week, burying Texas and Oklahoma under more than a foot of snow. The storm has already had a deadly impact, killing one person in Oklahoma after a roof gave way under thick snow. And a man died after his SUV hit an icy patch on Interstate 70 in Kansas. In Amarillo, Texas, 19 inches of snow fell, blown by gusts of up to 77 miles per hour.
See what it's like so far. Here we go.
Kansas, which barely recovered from last week's monster storm, is bracing for even more punishment.
We've had a nice winter so far, and now, boy, in the last 2 weeks here, it's like, gee.
From Oklahoma to Maine, 19 states are under storm watches and warnings, streets covered with thick ice and snow. Dozens of motorists and troopers have reported being stranded or have abandoned their vehicles with near zero visibility and drifting snow. Even truckers were stranded as icy roads and blizzard-like conditions forced Interstate 40 in New Mexico to be shut down.
It costs money to sit still, and it also costs money to run that thing empty. You know, I mean, as far as fuel, so hopefully they get it cleared up.
Emergency officials are doing their best to clear the rows of piles of snow. The monster storm even brought hurricane-force winds, knocking out power to thousands and peeling bricks from buildings.
Sounded like someone had run into the building and it was falling apart.
In San Antonio, 3 people were killed when high winds caused a brush fire to break out at a mobile home park.
It was like within seconds, my house went up in flames in seconds. So as I went to my house, tried to get, the important things, pictures, important papers, and I couldn't even do that. My house just went up in flames.
Charlene Israel, CBN News.
Well, they say it's an ill will that blows nobody any good, and I think that some good's coming out of all this snow. They've had terrible droughts in that part of the country, so this snowfall should help the crops for the spring, although it's kind of painful right now. Well, you switch to the thing that we're sick of hearing about, and that's the storm that's brewing in Washington, D.C. This one over those spending cuts that will go into effect Friday. Friday, folks, it's almost here. The dreaded sequester. And Lee Webb has that story from the CBN newsroom. Lee, tell us.
Yeah, Pat, those automatic spending cuts total $85 billion. And the White House is painting the so-called sequester as a perfect storm for economic decay, delays, and hardship. But as Jennifer Wishon reports, some call that play a scare tactic.
Reduced unemployment checks, no overtime for Border Patrol agents, and furloughs for hundreds of thousands of government workers. Those are just some of the cuts scheduled to begin Friday under the so-called sequester. The White House doesn't want any part of it, even bringing out Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano to raise the sense of urgency.
Look, I don't think we can maintain the same level of security at all places around the country with sequester as without sequester.
She predicts within just weeks, airline passengers will face longer lines at security checkpoints, delays as long as 4 hours at some major airports.
The military will really feel the pinch. Today, President Obama visits a shipbuilding company in Virginia, a major manufacturer in a state that will see some 90,000 Department of Defense employees furloughed starting Friday.
Speaking to the nation's governors meeting in Washington, President Obama says Congress needs to stop playing politics and govern.
These cuts do not have to happen. Congress can turn them off anytime with just a little bit of compromise.
The president needs to stop campaigning, stop trying to scare the American people, stop trying to scare states.
Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal pointed to the president's appetite for new revenues.
Let's be clear. The spending in the federal budget will actually be larger even after these reductions than it was last year.
He says most Americans believe it's possible to cut 3% out of the federal budget without losing critical services. Still, some governors don't want to find out what the cuts feel like.
They need to get out of that box that sits under the dome and understand that this has real implications in people's lives.
The White House says the president is staying engaged, but with just days before the cuts hit, there's no evidence of any active negotiations. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Pat, we heard one Republican congressman say yesterday that if John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, caves on this issue, he will no longer be Speaker of the House.
Lee, I think you're right. I think the Republicans have got to hold tough on this. The president asked for tax increases. He got them. Okay, he's got them. So he wanted to, as Bob Woodward pointed out, he wanted to change the goalposts and add more taxes. And the Republicans have got to say, no, you've got to cut spending. But Lee, one liberal was saying, you know, wouldn't it be terrible if these cuts went into effect and nobody noticed? You know, wouldn't it be terrible? We have raised the specter of horror that's going to come upon our country. But when you see some of the incredible waste that goes on, and I point out on one thing, they're spending $550 million a year on Planned Parenthood. Well, how is that going to hurt America if they just cut those funds? And you begin to go down the list of some of the craziness. And, you know, Senator Coburn of Oklahoma brought some of the job positions that they have open, you know, director of White House tours and things like that. I mean, come on. Why don't you cut some of those positions instead of talking about shutting the lights off the Washington Monument and not having any kind of homeland security at airports and so forth? The whole thing is just a manufactured nonsense. There isn't any budget anywhere that can't be cut 2 or 3%. I don't care what budget it is. And the fact that they're going to cut these things, it's just a non-starter. And I appreciate Bobby Jindal and Nikki Haley and some of these other governors who are standing tough and saying, look, well, you guys quit playing golf and going on vacations and get down to business. But the president doesn't want a solution. That's what they've got to understand. He does not want a solution. He wants a fight. So he can go out in the next election and say, look what those terrible Republicans did. We just have got to work for the good of America and forget Democrat and Republican and begin to think, what is good for this nation? Lee.
Pat, political turmoil in Italy is sparking fears among investors. Voters there have made it clear they oppose budget cutbacks designed to battle Italy's massive debt. They have thrown strong support behind former Premier Silvio Berlusconi. The outcome of the election is still uncertain, but the news is worrying international investors and reviving fears that the European debt crisis would get worse. The White House denies that donors to a new group will have special access to the president. The new group is called Organizing for Action, and it was formed out of the president's re-election campaign. The New York Times reports that those who gave or raised $500,000 or more for the group will get to meet with the president every 3 months. White House spokesman Jay Carney would not address that report directly, but he did say there's no price tag to see the president. Some critics, however, say the contribution setup is another example of how money is corroding democracy. Pat?
I remember a governor of California who is no longer in office, who was a Democrat, and in order to see him, there had to be a contribution of $200,000. Then you'd have a sit down with the governor. And if you didn't have the money, you didn't get to see him. And I think the president has raised the ante. It's $500,000. And then every 3 months or so, you get to sit down around a table and listen to him pontificate about what's going on in the nation. But this is standard. They've been doing it for a long time. And people who decry the influence of money ought to wake up and smell the coffee, because it's been going on for a long time. Lee?
The latest round of nuclear talks between Iran and 6 major world powers is getting underway. The U.S. has suggested that sanctions on Iran might be cut back if Iran limits its nuclear program. Those sanctions have led to serious inflation in Iran, but the Iranians are not showing any signs of backing down on their nuclear activities. The American pastor imprisoned in Iran because of his faith has released a letter detailing his abuse. For the first time, Saeed Abedini admitted in a letter to family that he's facing horrific pressures, violence, and psychological warfare. The 32-year-old father of two says conditions inside Evin prison are torturous, writing they are only waiting for one thing, for me to deny Christ, but they will never get this from me. Last week, the American Center for Law and Justice filed a petition with the United Nations Human Rights Council for Abedini's release. Former Surgeon General C. Everett Koop has died. Koop served 7 years in Ronald Reagan's administration in the 80s. He was a professing evangelical Christian who opposed premarital sex and homosexuality, but he did shock many Christians when he endorsed condoms and sex education to stop the spread of AIDS. Koop was an outspoken opponent of abortion in his book and film series, Whatever Happened to the Human Race. The National Right to Life Committee said Koop provided a voice for the voiceless. He also led a crusade to end smoking in America. C. Everett Koop was 96 years old. Pat?
Well, we'll miss him, and we might say that he was a great champion. And, you know, he called amniocentesis a search and destroy mission. I mean, he just told it like it was, and the liberals hated him, but he was a terrific guy. Lee?
Pat, the Mediterranean diet may be more heart healthy than a low-fat diet. A new study in the New England Journal of Medicine monitored nearly 8,000 people over a 5-year span. Those who ate the Mediterranean diet had an astonishing 30% lower risk of cardiovascular problems compared with the low-fat group. The diet's advantages were so clear that researchers stopped the study early. We need to point out that what we're talking about here are the right kinds of fats. Pat, as you know, the Mediterranean diet includes a lot of olive oil, which is heart healthy.
Well, that and fish oil. I have 2 tablespoons full of Norwegian cod liver oil every day. It's loaded in omega-3s.
Well, the reason it's good is it's Norwegian. I mean...
Terry, I should have realized that.
Yes, you should have.
The Norwegians are the healthiest people. Look at Terry. But you know, I saw a doctor the other day on PBS talking about the fact that there's a pharmacopoeia in the field that God has placed in these vegetables, all kinds of nutrients that unlock triggers in our body that bring about health. And you just can't get it by eating fast food. And when you look at high fructose corn syrup, when you look at the incredible, what is almost 150 pounds of sugar we eat per person per year, and you look at the burgers and the fries and the, you know, trans fats and all the stuff that's in there, we're not eating fresh fruits and vegetables. It's just that simple.
You know, as it comes to this time of year, don't you just feel anxious to see the plethora of that's available in really wonderful quantities and freshness in the stores come spring? That'll be great.
I'm so proud of my wife. I said, dear, it's time to have another bowl of my famous...
Your soup.
Minestrone soup. And I said, you know, we've got to go out and we've got to get chickpeas and we've got to get kale and we've got to get onions and we've got to get potatoes and we've got to get celery and all these things. So God bless her, I heard her chopping in the kitchen. Chop, 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 chop. I mean, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of chopping, but you know, after a while you get the hang of it. I've made it several times for my family. They love it. And this is the time of year to have that.
Pot of the stuff, and we cook it for about 5 hours, and then she put it in the refrigerator. So today I'll be able to enjoy, loaded with vegetables.
Yes, and good
kale, spinach, cabbage, celery.
And a little Norwegian fish oil.
And a little, well, a little olive oil for that. I don't put fish oil in the soup. That would not be cool.
Chicken.
8 Indonesian Christians seeking asylum in the U.S. have been granted a temporary stay of their deportation orders. 5 of them have been living in a New Jersey church for months in defiance of an order to boot them out of the country. Immigration officials say the Christians can stay here legally for another year while they continue to seek asylum status. Hundreds of Indonesian Christians fled their country in the mid-90s. That's when radical Muslims attacked Christian villages and destroyed more than 1,000 churches. An evangelical-based group is organizing pastor policy briefings and voter registration drives in 12 key states for the 2014 election cycle. CBN's David Brody has filed an exclusive report on the move. The group's goal is to engage pastors around issues so they'll get their congregations to take part in the political process and flock to voting booths. The first Pastors in Pews event is scheduled for the last week of May in Des Moines. You can find out more about this story and get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.